We're going to go ahead and kick this off. I'm very excited today. We have Doug Howard, who is the president of Growth Team Strategies. He is going to talk to us about knowing your numbers, a roadmap to sustained growth and greater profitability. Really excited to have you on today, Doug. It's going to be a great presentation, I have no doubt. Before we hop into that, though, got a couple things we want to just remind people of. If you're not yet part of our JobTread Pros Facebook group, we highly recommend you hop in there. I think we're at nearly 8,000 members in this group, which is super awesome. We love the community, love to see everyone helping each other out, asking questions, got ideas to share, whether JobTread related, business related, whatever it may be. This is a really great community that I encourage everyone to join if you're able. We've got Builder Stories. This is my weekly podcast. So every Wednesday we have a new episode that comes out. It's really exciting that you're able to hear from people behind the scenes, how they got started, the successes they've had, the challenges that they've had as well, and how they've overcome them. There's a lot that you can learn by listening to other people and their experiences so that hopefully you can skip over a couple of those hard lessons and be able to learn from other people's experience. You can tune in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or just directly on builderstories.com. And also, if you've got a story to share, we'd love to have you on. You can apply to be on the show right from our website, builderstories.com. And lastly, want to remind people about JobTread Connect. We have our annual user conference that's coming up in January. It'll be January 14th to the 16th in Dallas, Texas. We are so excited about this. This will be our fourth year doing this show. We are expecting to have over 1,000 people from all over the world join us for this 3-day event, jam-packed with education sessions, networking, a whole lot of fun as well. So please do grab your tickets as soon as you can. The price will go up one more time in December, so you want to get them before that point, as well as be sure to grab your hotel reservations. I believe we now have an alternative hotel because I think we're getting close to selling out the main one. So do grab those reservations as well as your plane tickets. If you're flying in, we can't wait to see everyone. It's going to be a great, great show this year. And with that, I want to turn it over to my good friend, Doug Howard. Welcome, Doug.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here. It's exciting. All right. You ready for me to roll?
You got it. You should have control.
All right. Beautiful. Well, yeah, my name's Doug Howard with Growth Team Strategies. We are proud to be partners with JobTread. I'm excited about JobTread Connect. It'll be my second year there. And we're excited about participating and sponsoring and that kind of stuff. We also know that we've seen over the course of the last year just the power of folks getting really, really engaged in, JobTread in the community and what they can do and how all that feeds together. And it feeds into our topic today tremendously. So we do business coaching. We help people integrate their QuickBooks. We work with folks really to understand their numbers. But our focus is always really where you want to be in 5 years. Growth planning, succession planning, and those kinds of things. And that really is going to kind of bring us to our topic today, which we're talking to folks all over the country about, some in person, some remotely. But it's a great time of year because we're just starting to look at what does 2026 need to look like? What's it going to look like? Are we doing budgets? What are we thinking about? Kind of doing a little recap on 2025. And we want to make sure that we're driving success, that we're not just sort of riding the curve and dealing with the things that come in and hoping for the best, but really driving with the right activities, the things that are going to drive the numbers. All of the slides here, you're more than welcome to. So this is an easy way to get them. So you don't feel like you have to copy everything down or take pictures or whatever. You're more than welcome to do those things. But every bit of this, we're more than happy to share. So that's available to you with that code. All right. So the first place I want to start is determining the profit you need for 2026. So when I'm out talking to folks, talking to different organizations, I like to ask the first question, which is, how are you going to set your profit goals for the coming year? How are you going to decide what your profit level should be in 2026? Now, some people will tell me, well, I want to do $4 million in revenue next year. Well, that's great. That's a sales goal, but that's not a profit goal. So we're going to talk about some of the difference there. That may be something that we want to aspire to, but we want to get more down to the point of what does this business need to produce for you and for the future of the company itself going forward. Sometimes people will tell me, I want to make 10%. right? Or some other percentage they come up with, which is a great goal too. The work that I do with the remodeling industry, with Remodelers Advantage, we're always looking for folks to do 10% revenue. I mean, 10% of revenue as a net profit, as a guide. Sometimes they do a little bit better than that. So, maybe 10 to 12. But I also know I can't go to the grocery store and and spend percentages, right? And so it's like, well, it's 10% of what? Right? Because I would take 10% of the right number, but 10% of the wrong number doesn't necessarily mean we are where we want to be. For others, it's a little bit better than last year. Others tell me they're going to look back at an average of the last few years. I'm telling you, I want you to look at this a little bit differently. And I want you to start with a really important question, which is, where do you want to be in 5 years? Now, people tell me, oh gosh, I can't even tell you where I want to be next year. 5 years is really, really way too far out. But, usually once we start talking about the things it's going to take to change the business, maybe the right hire, maybe some training, some of those things take 2, 3 years to really put in place. So we've got to have some idea. Now, we don't have to have the perfect idea, but we're going to get close, right? For you golfers out there, we're going to get the ball on the green. We don't have to get in the hole. I always tell people, if I was taking a ride from Maryland to where I am down to Disney World, at some point I've got to figure out what exit I'm going to get off, but not for the first 8 hours of the trip, right? So right now we want to do the things that are going to drive in the right general direction for where you want the business to be. So I'd like you to just take a second right now as we're getting started. And it's important you really think about this. Put yourself in the moment to say, today is not November 19th, 2025. Let's take a moment and just time travel a little bit. Today is November 19th, 2030. Okay? Now, how old are you? Your spouse? Your kids? Where do you live? Is it the same home? What was the last vacation you just took? How are you spending your time? How are you spending your money? So just take a second, if you got a piece of paper nearby or you've got your phone or whatever, just jot down 2 or 3 things that you'd like to be true for you 5 years from now personally. Because at the end of the day, these businesses need to drive us to where we want our lives to go. And so it may be a reflection of, hey, I'd like to be at this revenue level, but it's because I have a certain lifestyle I'm trying to support. Or I'd like to be able to do it and only be working a certain number of hours. Or I'd like to be doing more of this in my business and none of this in my business, right? But we want to start with, where do you want to be personally? Once you get an idea of that, where you'd like to be, and you got a couple of those things that are really important to you, the next question is, what does that look like for the business? What needs to be true in your business at that point to support the things that you're trying to do personally? So, what does the structure need to be? Do we need to hit a certain revenue, a certain gross profit? Are we going to have a certain sort of structure? Maybe you might say, well, by that time, I'd only like to be a handful or a small percentage of all the sales, but right now I make all the sales. Or I'd like to be able to travel for 4 weeks out of the year. But to do that, I need a general manager or an operations manager, or the structure that's going to go along with not just the money, but the structure that will allow me to kind of work in the way I want to be working. But then, of course, we also want to look at, what should your compensation be? How many hours do you work, or do you want to be working at that point? I always tell people, especially in a lot of industries, not just construction, but in construction, any project could be a big landscaping project, could be a remodeling project. We always start with what it's supposed to look like at the end, right? We always start with, we do a design, or we do a sketch, or we do a mock-up, or we do a scope of work, but we have a very clear idea, and that's why we're good at what we do, right? Is to say, well, I know the sequence, I know the materials, I know all these things, what I'm going to need for trades, all these things, because I know what it's supposed to look like when I'm done. And I always kind of jokingly say to remodeling folks, you'd never start by just throwing wood out on the, boards out on the lawn and nailing boards together and see where it takes you, right? You would always start with the end in mind. In business, sometimes we start by just grabbing a couple things and nailing them together and see where it takes us. So the more we can get clear on what we're trying to build, what this end design looks like, what that landscaped yard is going to look like when the project is done, or whatever walk of life you're in, and say, I'm going to define and design what this business ought to look like as best I can. We may make some changes along the way, but then working into what those decisions need to be to get us there become infinitely easier. And so where that takes us to, and this is one of the forms, I know it's probably like the least favorite form that a lot of people have when it comes to accounting and financial information, right? So I'm gonna give you the awful task of starting with your balance sheet. But the reason I want to start with the balance sheet is because the balance sheet basically is like a net worth statement for your business, right? It tells you what you have and what you owe. Well, if we're looking at this point where we want to be 5 years from now, we want to be thinking about what needs to be different in that balance sheet 5 years from today from where we are right now. And it's not that hard to do. It sounds kind of confusing, but it's really not that hard to do. You take that balance sheet and you say, I have this much cash in my bank right now. What would I like my cash on hand to be at that future point? Maybe it's $100,000 more than is in there right now. Maybe it's a dramatically different number, whatever. How much would I like to have in accounts receivable? Now, for some of us, we'd like to have more accounts receivable. We'd like to have more money that's out there because of the work we've done and the flow of just a good business that's going to have money owed. For some of us, we want to see that number actually come down. We get too much out on the street, right? And we want to basically have a little bit better handle on that. Accounts payable. We want to have a current accounts payable that's for the jobs we're doing right now, the expenses that we have right in front of us, not playing catch up, not paying off stuff that's long since passed. Debt's another one of those things. I think most people, when they look at a balance sheet, if we look at a 5-year goal, I can't tell you how many times the goal from the person I'm talking to is, I want no debt in 5 years, or at least debt related to a building or vehicles or something that's tangible, but not just the money I have out there because of operating issues that I've had in the past or what have you. And then over this 5-year period of time, what do you want to take out in, owner distributions and things that come out to you, in terms of benefits to you and tax payments, kind of the whole sum of owner contributions. When we get an idea of what this looks like, what we need to get to over this 5-year period of time, you're going to find, and I'm not going to bore you with the math right now, but the difference between where your balance sheet is today and where it needs to be 5 years from now is how much profit the business needs to generate during that period of time. So you just think in your own personal life, if you wanted $10,000 more in your bank account at the end of next year than you have right now, you'd have to basically make 10,000 more or spend 10,000 less, but you'd have to perform in a way that generated that 10,000 to have it in the bank, to have it in savings. And that's all we're doing here. So I would encourage you to say that I'm going to stop for a minute, think about where I want to be, where the business needs to be, what that means for some of these key items. And from that, it's going to tell me I need to be in this progression. Now, the next question becomes, what does 2026 need to do for us in that regard? Because we're not going to get all the way there in the first year. And we'll talk about some of the mechanics of this in just a second. But we want to be very clear that if I want my cash reserves to go up or my debt to go down, or I'm going to take a distribution or whatever, I want to be clear on what do I need 2026 to produce so that we're along our way on this journey to this place 5 years from now. Now, I like to tell a lot of stories because I think people remember the stories more than some of the business concepts and things like that. So I always tell people, to me, the reason I like a good 5-year plan is because you can get away with a lot if you look just 1 year at a time. You kind of get halfway through a good year and maybe you spend a little more money than you should. You get halfway through a bad year and you stop doing things you really need to do. Like now's not the time to hire a production manager, right? Or whatever it is. So what we want to get focused on is if this was like a 5-day road trip, right? And a lot of times I use the example of if I had a daughter getting married in California in 5 days, I have 6 kids, so I always have someone at my house getting married or some big event, right? And so if I had to be from Maryland to California and I charted my course over those 5 days. If I didn't get far enough the first day, if I didn't get as far as I thought I was going to, I would adjust on day two, right? I would leave earlier or change my course or skip a stop or drive a little faster within the confines of the law and good safety. But I would I would adjust at that point because I need day 2, 3, and 4 to get me where I need to get to, because the destination and the outcome and the timing of that destination are not the variable. What we have to do to get there needs to be the variable. Oftentimes in business, we do all this work and we have the highs and the lows, and we make sales and profit and loss as well, and we see where it takes us. I want you to be clear about where you're going and when you want to get there, and we're going to make what it takes from the business standpoint the variable. Now, if I was on that 5-day road trip and 3 days into it, I was nowhere near halfway, and this wedding's happening with me or without me, I'm going to stop, park the car, and buy a plane ticket, right? So in the beginning, I can adjust if I'm off a little bit. But at some point, I may have to revisit the strategy and say, this is not getting me there, right? So whether it's, time and material jobs, or the way you're quoting, or the size of projects, or whether you self-perform things or not, all those things become bigger strategic decisions where you say, well, in year one, our margin was a little low, our profit, we need to adjust. At some point, we may say, no, this strategy is not working. We're going to change that. But at the end of the day, we want to be crystal clear on what does 2026 need to contribute to this story, because that's where we're going to set our goal. Okay, so from that, I'm going to ask you to consider adopting what I'm calling the Know Your Numbers approach. Okay, so this is the tool. It's a little hard to read. We're going to zoom in on this over the course of the next little bit here together. And in this, at the end, you'll have an opportunity to download. It's pretty straightforward, but it is designed to take us all the way from what do we need this year to produce, through what are the things that we know about the business, what are the numbers that every business owner should know. And I will tell you, when I ask a lot of business owners, I'm sure it's none of the folks on this webinar, I'm sure it's the other people that are out there, right? When I ask them for the specific number of what their gross profit needs to be, or the number of projects they need to do, they don't know. And it comes down to only 8 or 9 numbers, so we should know them. But then we want to look at what is the corresponding action that could influence those numbers, because we don't want to just take those as it is what it is. We want to take that as, well, that's the framework that it could be, but I can improve on that. And so we want to build on that. So we're going to start with the very first section, which is this idea of what profit we need for 2026. So we're going to ask ourselves, for this year, how much do you want to increase your cash reserves? How much will you reduce debt? What do you want to reinvest in the business? How much will you take in owner distributions? And in that, we're going to put a calculator in there, because if you make enough profit to do all those things, the reality is that you also end up having to pay taxes on that, right? Federal, maybe state, maybe depends on what, if you're in Canada, it's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, if we make profit, tax is going to come out of that. So we got to make sure that's in the equation as well. So in this first section, which is zoomed in a little bit here, we look at these blue blocks and we say, okay, very simply, we're just going to put in what those numbers are. So here we have, I want to make $50,000. So I want $50,000 to go into my cash reserves. I want next year's ending bank balance to be $50,000 higher than this year. When I look at my debt, I want that to be down $40,000. That may not be all the debt I'm carrying, but that's the part that I want to chip away this year. $25,000 is going to go back into company reinvestment. Could be, I would say a truck, might have to be a used truck, could be some computer equipment. It might be the first 6 months of payroll for a new employee that's going to be a trainee. Then we've got the money that I want to be able to take out as a distribution. Now, if I do all that, and this is just for calculation purposes, assuming a 25% tax rate, yours might be higher or lower. But at the end of the day, to do those 4 things I've listed, I need $278,000 of profit to come out of 2026. It's not general. It's not theoretical. It's not based on a percentage. This is what I need if I'm going to take that money, pay my taxes, and do those other four things. And this is the mark of whether or not the business has got done well enough on the first day of this road trip, right? The first year of this 5-year plan to be where we want to be. I want you to know that number, right? And it's interesting. Sometimes we know our numbers better when we're in trouble, right? If you're losing $10,000 a month, you know it, and your focus is on, I got to find $10,000. If you have debt that you're trying to get out of, it's easy to focus. Sometimes it's harder to focus when we're doing well, right? Like, where are we going to take this business? What do we want to accomplish? All right. So we get to this point and we agree this is the number that we want to go after. Okay, great. So now we got to look at the operating numbers of the business that are going to be really important. And you probably know this stuff, but I want you to have it front of mind because we're going to talk about the activities that drive these things because that's where the opportunity is. That's where the whole ball game is. So once we know the profit, we want to know how much is your overhead budgeted to be, right? What does it cost you to operate, whether you do 10 jobs next year or 100 jobs next year? Now, part of this is getting the right things into cost of goods and the right things in overhead. If something's going to go up twice as much because you have twice as many jobs, that is a variable cost and it needs to find its way either into cost of goods or into indirect expenses. Again, won't bore you with the details of that, but just kind of be clear that, those are things I've got to know that I've got stuff in the right place. But we want to be clear on what our overhead is. Then we want to know what our current gross profit percentage is. What are we making on the jobs that we're making? Now, for some people, they say, well, I saw all my jobs at 35%. Great. But that's not necessarily what you're making. That's what you're selling the jobs at. So we've got to know what these jobs look like when we're done with them. If you're selling them at 35% and they're coming in at 32%, you're only going to have that 32% to work with. So there are things we can do to improve that. But again, we want to be very clear on where we are and what that number looks like. It's also helpful for us to know our average sale. Now, for some folks, this is a little bit hard because for some folks have projects all over the map. Sometimes we break this down a little bit differently. If people say, listen, I do a handful of big jobs and a bigger number of like moderately sized jobs. So there's different ways to look at this. But at the end of the day, we want to get a ballpark idea of where we need to be with that. So what do we do with that? Well, what we do is we move down to the next section of the Know Your Numbers worksheet and say, okay, we're starting with that $278,000 we all agreed was what we needed to make, right? And now we're saying, I've got $480,000 of overhead, okay? $40,000 a month is what my overhead is running. Well, that means I need $758,000 worth of gross profit. And if my profit margin is 33%, what I'm actually getting from the jobs I'm doing, then I need 2.3 million in revenue, right? That's what we need to be doing. If our average sale is $54,000, then we're going to need to do 43 jobs this year. Sometimes we'll have people actually separate that into two columns, big and small jobs. I need 8 small and 27 big, or the other way around, 8 big and 27 small, but whatever it is. So we're very clear. But again, I want my team to know this is the profit we're shooting for. This is where we got to keep our overhead at. This is what our profit margin needs to be. This is what we're looking for in average sales. Okay. Now, once we know the numbers of sales, then we get onto the marketing stuff, the stuff that's so great to be able to track in the CRM. And again, if people are sort of squishy on what their actual numbers are for financials, they're super squishy on, some of their marketing statistics. I always tell people, if you tell me your closing rate is about 50%, that to me is 99% likely that you don't know what your closing percentage is, right? It's a very round number. But we want to look at what is our closing percentage on proposals? What is our percentage? What percentage of your prospects get a proposal, go to proposal? What percentage of your leads are actually qualified? And then how many referrals do you expect next year out of your existing source of business? So what we do with that is we take those 43 sales that we need to get and we say, well, right now we're closing 65% of the proposals we put out there. That tells us we need 65 proposals written next year to get to the 43. 40% of our, I'm sorry, 90% of our prospects, if they're a prospect, actually get a proposal. Like very few people that are qualified don't get a proposal from us. So that bumps that number up to 73. And when we look at our marketing and we look at the leads that come in, right, our leads are 40% qualified. 40% of the leads that come in are folks that are, reasonably looking for what we do, have an understanding of roughly the kind of the price range we're going to be in. They're not looking for, if you're doing whole home additions, they're not looking for you to come out and replace a screen door, right? And so we look at that and say, okay, well, that tells me I need 182 leads, but I have a really good referral program. I have a really great referral engine, and I expect 20 of those to come from referrals. So that tells me what I need to do from a marketing standpoint. And again, some of these things may vary depending on how you track them. My experience is not everybody, well, most people just don't have a very good track for these things. And they're telling us a different story, right? Our closing percentage is telling us how our sales team is doing. But our number of leads that are qualified leads is telling us how our marketing's doing, right? Which brings us to the next point. So we fill this out, and the math of this stuff is interesting. You can get your targets dialed in. Shouldn't take you more than, probably 15, 20 minutes to do that. And we want you super dialed in right before we do that budget for 2026. But now, that's not really the interesting part. I always tell people, the older I get, I look at things and I say, everything that's good information falls into two categories: things that are interesting and things that are actionable, right? I'm interested in the things that are actionable. What can we do with that? So I will tell you, if you look at that worksheet, everything that is in blue is where we're headed. Everything that's in white is a target number based on that. But everything in green is where we have an opportunity to take an action, improve performance, drive that number, and dramatically improve where we are. So what actions can we take to improve your numbers? So think about this, right? One of the first things is we said, okay, we have to have this profit number. Now, sometimes people say to me, well, Doug, one way I could get that number more manageable is to not take as much for myself. That is the wrong answer, okay? That is not how we're going to fund this thing. Now, just to make sure that at the end of the day, the business is where it needs to be, you may have to make some concessions, but that's not what we're planning for. We're planning to be where you need to be. Okay. So the first thing I like to do is look at overhead, though. And sometimes we'll have people do what we call the 90% challenge. We take all of our overhead and we put it in one column. Maybe we look at the 10 months of 2025 right now. And then in the next column, I put a number that's 90% of that prior number. And there's no magic to why it's 90%. It just kind of gets people thinking. Now, some expenses you could not reduce. They may be locked in. Your rent or your health insurance may actually be going up, or other numbers you wouldn't want to cut necessarily, like some of your key staffing. But it is amazing to me when we go through this exercise, how many times we find things that we're spending money on that are not necessarily adding value to the customer. Some of them are legacies to things that we've done before. We've already switched to JobTread, and yet we're still paying some other software company for something they used to do for us. Or, any number of things. We used to have 8 salespeople. We're paying for 8 trucks and 8 cell phones, but we only have 6 salespeople, and we're only going to have 6 salespeople going forward. Invariably, we can find opportunities to bring that number down. And, the interesting thing about it is we don't want to bring it down if it's going to impair our ability to perform. But a lot of times it's things that are not really going to affect that at all. And so the other thing is there's a lot of things out there we can negotiate, right? If you haven't talked to your insurance agent in the last few years about what you're paying and why and what your coverages are and things like that, you're missing the opportunity to have a conversation about, either that same broker may be able to take you different places. There are always new programs. And one of the things that always blows my mind is when I talk to one of my vendors and say, I've looked around and I think there's something out there that would be more cost effective. And then they turn around and say, oh, I can match that price. And it's like, well, why was I paying more then? Why weren't you matching that price? Right? So sometimes we got to be the squeaky wheel. We got to be the person out there saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Is there a cost-effective way to do it? Is there a better plan? But if you start to look at that and get that overhead number down, now we're starting to make it less, put less demand on us. You'll start to see that number of sales that we need, that revenue that we need, start to come down to get you to the same place where all that stuff that's happening up in the blue section still gets to happen. You get to achieve your goals. Improving gross profit percentage is huge, right? And this is one of the biggest reasons why we love when people are really doing job costing, really looking at job performance, digging into all of what JobTread has to offer to have information in the moment. That a project manager is not looking at a job a month after the job's done. They're looking at it while the job's going, when they can still impact it, right? So sometimes improving gross profit percentage means you're pricing better. You're estimating better. You're building in a price that works better for you. But all of gross profit percentage is not about pricing. Sometimes it's about how many hours we're using of our own labor force and where we have inefficiencies. Some of it's about how we're, managing slippage in all of what we do. Some of it can be as simple as how well we're managing change orders and are they really getting built into the billing system that we should be providing. If I could have the choice of growing sales by a significant amount over 5 years or improving my gross profit percentage 1% a year for 5 years, I would take the gross profit percentage because it makes you much more competitive. And you think about it, if you find an efficiency in a job or in the jobs that you're doing, and you can do it for a little bit less and still make as much money on it, or do it at the same price and make more money, the choice is we either make more or we put a more competitive price on the street, which right now for some folks could be the difference in getting a few more jobs that we might not be getting. Either way, that better gross profit percentage gives you a lot of room to maneuver. So if we can drive that number, and now we've had a little bit of an adjustment in the overhead, and you go back into your worksheet and you kind of tweak those numbers a little bit, you start to see things changing, right? Now we get over to the sales side and we improve our closing percentage. What do they say in baseball? If you hit 2 out of every 10 times you get up to bat, you're not very good. If you hit 3 out of every 10, you're awfully good. You hit 4 out of 10, you're in the Hall of Fame, right? It's like it comes down to like every 10 at bats we get with prospects that really are able to buy and good prospects for us and in our budget. If we can get just a little bit better, sometimes that's sales training. Sometimes I believe, and I'm a big believer in this, overcoming objections in the sales process is not about waiting for someone to ask a question and reacting to it. Because I don't know about you, but for me, I get the same 4 or 5 objections over and over and over again. The idea that I'm going to go all the way through a presentation and someone at the end is going to tell me that what they want to do is more than their budget, is that shocking to anybody? Is that a surprise to anybody? And so what I like to say is we're going to answer some of these objections even before they become objections. We're going to plant some seeds in our marketing materials. We're going to plant some seeds in the first conversations that we have. Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, listen, we are not going to be the least expensive quote out there. I want you to know right off the bat, we put a very high value in using the very best trades and the very best quality and, whatever your story is, because when you go back later and lo and behold, someone says, well, this is a little bit more than some of what the other people that we've looked at are showing us. You want to be able to go back and say, absolutely. That's why right from the very beginning, we talked about, is it quality? The length of time you're staying in the home, the length of time you want this project to be good for. Whatever it is, right, we can plant those seeds. Also, when we get to the point of non-business owners selling, which is a big challenge in a growing business, right, that is a whole challenge unto itself. And so we want to get them really good at the sales process. And, for a lot of folks that are selling quality products and quality services, selling is, sometimes that word I think really freaks people out. I've had people say, you can call me a designer, but like, don't say I'm a salesperson, even though like a big part of their job is selling, right? Because they immediately think of like white shoes and plaid pants and being on a used car lot. And it's like, okay, that is a form of selling. That is not the form of selling or even the best form of selling. What we're trying to do is marry up the needs of the customer, what they're trying to accomplish, with a very high quality product or service you've put together, and to get it to fit in a way that they pay for the value that they want, and it meets what they're able to do. Most of us know when we go to a really nice restaurant for our anniversary or go on a trip and stay in a really nice place, we know that is not the least expensive steak you can find in the state of Florida, right? You're there for the experience. You're there for the quality of how it's prepared. You're there for a number of different things. That's true of all the work that we do, right? Most of the folks that we get to work with are all very high quality, and therefore we've got to put that into the sales force to really understand and be able to explain it. Now, getting more qualified leads, that's all about our marketing. And there are a lot of great marketing companies out there. There are a lot of not so great marketing companies out there. The problem is they're hard to tell the difference. About 100 years ago, John Wanamaker, a retailer in Philadelphia, had a great quote. He said, "Only 50% of what I spend on marketing does me any good. The problem is I don't know what 50%." Right? And so we've got to be able to track things to figure out where we're getting our best leads from. And at the end of the day, how do we take those qualified leads and hone in our message and hone in who we're talking to and make it more compelling and clearer and not all over the map, and get more qualified leads? When you know what you need from your marketing, because you've done the exercise to know what profit you need for 2026, and you know what your operating expenses and your revenue and your margins are, and we know what marketing needs to produce, now, whether it's someone internally or someone that's an outside marketing company, you can sit down and say, this is what I need. How do you help me deliver this? A lot of times when we ask folks to do marketing for us, we give them such a vague mission that it's really hard for them to execute. Well, Doug, what would you like for 2026 for marketing? More? Better? Well, they don't know where to look for more and better. But when we start to hone in on, I want more of this type of lead that's going to be in this kind of price range, that's going to fit this kind of a process that we go through. Okay, now they know what to do with that stuff. The last thing for today, but every one of these green sections on that worksheet is a place you can dig into with your team, and it's a great exercise to do with your team. Hey, folks, first of all, do we know what our number is on this line? And secondly, once we know it, let's brainstorm. What would it take to move that just a little bit? I am so impressed with what I see come out of the teams of people that we get to work with. The folks that are a part of your organization, they want you to be successful. They're in the muck and mire of it every day. And a lot of times they know what it will take to get a little bit further down the road. And the companies that embrace that really give themselves a leg up. The last one is getting more referrals. I can't tell you how many people tell me, Doug, I don't have to worry about some of that stuff. We get most of our leads from referrals. First of all, we look at it, and oftentimes that turns out just not to be mathematically true. Now, we get referrals, and we love referrals because, they already maybe know us a little bit more and they trust us a little bit better. But at the end of the day, there's a process for actually generating referrals. And so we want to be able to look at it and say, what kind of outreach do we do with prior customers? Literally, with a small group of folks that I was working with just an hour ago, we were going around the room of commitments and ideas from the last time we had met. And one of the gentlemen said, you know what? I reached out to 3 former customers. 2 told me that they were good for this year. Only one of them gave me a new project to delve into. And it's like, wait a minute, you called 3 people and got a project out of it? Like that's a home run, right? So for those of us this time of year that are sending, holiday cards or Thanksgiving cards or gifts at the end of the year, that's great. But the dialogue of having a good discussion with a customer that's been happy with what we did about, do they have projects coming up? Do they have family members? I always like to just say to folks, listen, our schedule fills up really, really quickly, right? So we like to reach out to our very best customers first and see if they have anything or they have family members or friends because, we just as soon get your folks in right off the bat. Let's find a spot for them. It's much more of a courtesy call than a sales call, but it can be powerful. So these are the kinds of things that we want to be thinking about. These are just a handful, but the idea is when you know the number and you know that it's going to get you where you want to be, or maybe it's a little bit light, and you start to hone in on those things that will drive those numbers, it is powerful in terms of where you can get to. Now, I did want to mention because, we think this is a really powerful partnership and obviously, the folks here are affiliated with JobTread and good for you, is that so much of this can come from the resources that are within the program and the tools to create customized reports and things like that. We are seeing that when our folks get clear on the numbers, our conversation isn't like, how do we even find this stuff? It's where in the JobTread system do we find it? Is it already in a report? Is it already on a dashboard? Is it something we have to customize? It gives us a great opportunity to say, once we figure out where that's going to come from and we build that into the system, not only can we track it and move the needle on the numbers, but it's going to tell us where those numbers are going forward. And so I was just in Chicago yesterday with a customer that has been JobTread user for a couple of years. And we were going through like, what are the things that you use as it relates to this kind of planning? Well, I look at revenue that I'm carrying over to the next year, like how much of what I have already sold but not built is going to go into 2026. I look at revenue by job type because we're trying to drive our sales team in certain directions and away from certain things that maybe aren't the greatest jobs for us. Gross profit by job and by type of job, our closing percentages, and even our marketing lead sources. And these are just a handful of things. But at the end of the day, if we can capture from the point of inception, from the point we make a purchase, or from the point that we decide, that someone should be a prospect that we go after or not, any of those things, or that we're going to focus on more of an industry or more of a certain type of project, all these things make it more likely that we're going to be able to take those actions that are going to drive the numbers, that are going to get us up into that blue section where we have the profit we want. And lo and behold, when we do that over the course of a couple of years, that vision, that idea of where we wanted to be, where we wanted to be personally, and where this business needed to take us for that to be true, all of a sudden becomes much more executable. It's the playbook. We know what to do. And so many of us are working really, really, really hard, and a couple of tweaks here and a little improvement there and some focus and sometimes stopping doing something that we just aren't benefiting from can make all the difference. I mean, I spend probably 2/3 of my day in and day out, doing this with folks. And it's so rewarding because the people I get to do it with are great people. When they make money, they hire people, they contribute to their community, they do important things, and they do quality work along the way in lots of different industries. And all we got to do is help them be a little bit more successful to get there. And I know I've heard Eric say many, many times that's really the passion behind JobTread, right? And that's why, we love when we get to work with people whose thinking aligns. It's like, this is why JobTread was created, right? And so we look at it and go, okay, then let's take all of the power of that and all of what it can create, distill it down to our roadmap, distill it down to our goals, and make sure that they're actually driving us where we want to be. And lo and behold, I get to pull up to the wedding 15 minutes before the ceremony starts. I made it on time. I get to enjoy those things in life that are so incredibly important. That's what we want for everybody that's involved. If you want the actual live template, here's a place you can grab it. You can grab that QR code and bring that. You can download it, horse around with it. Feel free to reach out. Sometimes people send them to me and go like, I don't like the story this is telling me. It's like, okay, well, we can fix that. Sometimes it's like, okay, I see now there's one or two things that are going to really drive our success over the next couple of years. And for others, they're like, man, we just literally had no idea. Like we just started working. And really for a lot of us, especially folks that are in construction and landscaping, and so many people are following their passion, what they love to do and what they're great at. And they didn't go into business to do QuickBooks or payroll or HR. And I always tell them, you get to do more of what you're passionate about if we get right on what the business is behind the passion, right? When we get the business behind the passion working correctly, then we get to go do a lot more of that. So I think that brings us to the point, if I'm right. Yeah, if we got any questions that people would like to ask.
Awesome, Doug. Yeah, I love that. A lot of great information there. So if anyone's got any burning questions, why don't you post them in the chat, or we got the Q&A box open here. Happy to field those. It looks like we did have one come in. I think it was earlier when you're talking about the model there. Just to be clear, we're talking about net profit.
Yeah, yes, net profit. Yep. So we're always going from revenue, and then after cost of goods down to gross profit, and then after overhead, net profit. And then that whole blue section is what has to come after profit, after net profit.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just from our perspective, it's been really exciting seeing you, Doug, and how you work with our clients and how you've been able to build such a great business that is just so supportive of all of their needs, from being able to help them from a coaching standpoint as well as from the accounting standpoint, getting their QuickBooks set up. I mean, you really have done a great job building out a team that is like well equipped to help support people and their growth. Like you said, it's very, very important that people understand where they want to go, what they want to be able to do, but they've got to ask the right questions and know what they need to focus on. And it's often a big challenge for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the numbers freak some people out, right? It's like as soon as you put things in sort of numeric, it's like, that numbers aren't my thing. And it's like, well, you know what? That may be, but let's use them for what we need to use them for and get back to what is your thing, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I always tell people if numbers aren't your thing, then you definitely need to find somebody who can help you make it become your thing and get that good understanding. Because without having that insight into the numbers, I mean you're essentially flying blind, and it's so helpful to understand the metrics and the KPIs and the numbers that truly matter, because that's how you're going to continue to improve month after month, quarter after quarter, year after year.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So it looks like we got a couple questions in the chat. KDS, are there any relevant reports in JobTread? Yeah, like all of them, really, right? But I'll be a little more specific. Like when we're looking at gross profit percentage, we want to really hone in on, the percentage of what was budgeted from the estimate and how that's coming out in the actuals from the report. And we will look at those side by side and line item by line item. It is it's like a treasure map towards like, okay, let's find that thing where we're just a little bit off, and dig in there. On some of the CRM reports and things like that, we like to look at how long it takes people to go from one phase to the next during the sales process, or maybe where people are dropping out. That gives us some clues along the way. Also, one of the things that's super powerful that we've been, I think this, Eric, was probably the first conversation you and I ever had was about the WHIP report, right?
No.
And then you guys went out and knocked it out. It was great. But like the whole idea of WHIP, which is I'm not going to count my revenue based on the money flowing in, but on the work that I've actually produced. I've had people come to me and go, Doug, I don't understand it. I love the front end of a job and it looks like we're doing great. And then we get about halfway through and things get tight. And then we get to the end and we don't have enough money to finish the job, or we're awfully tight, or we're not where we thought we would be. What WHIP does is it says, well, you may have brought in 40% of that job or 30% of that job, but you've only earned 20% of it by the work you've done. So, some of that money that's there, it's not your money yet. And so when we start looking at profitability in that way, that's a huge one as well. I think the other thing for us, which is really, really fun, is that many of the reports are customizable. So, Eric, we get kind of geeky on things like cash flow reports and some projection tools. But if there's not a report that's in there that's not exactly the way we look at it, we go in and there's so much opportunity to customize it to either A, get it very, very close to where we want it to be, or to get it where it's given us the data to put into something very easily. So I think every one of them has, there's so many things that have the potential to, to help with. So that was a great question. We also have a question. What is the average you're seeing a small company should be reinvesting back into their business? Yeah. Trying to jump over the $3 million hurdle. Yeah, that is one of those levels, right? We see growing these businesses getting to about $1 million, you can do with a relatively little overhead. You get to that point, you got to start putting some people in. You have a place, you have a little bit of runway. Get to about 2.5, 3 million. Then all of a sudden things get stretched again. You get over that next one. That's a fun one because if you get over that well, that can take you probably from about three to about maybe 6.5. There's a lot of money to be made in that next level, but it's a hard one to get over. Once you get over that, then things get a little bit different. But I think the thing is you got to look at it and say, and it's funny because reinvestment sometimes will show up in that blue section. Sometimes it shows up in your payroll and your marketing, right? And so I think you just got to make sure you're being competitive with, what you're reinvesting in marketing. But I like to see about 20%, 25% in the early years going back into the business. And I think the hardest thing is in my experience, once we build out a structure that we know is going to work, people are too slow. Now you got to be careful, but people are too slow to put in positions that they're going to need. And invariably, they get really close sometimes. This is why I like to budget over 5 years instead of one. They're like, I was so close. This was going to be the year I was going to do my first production manager or my first field supervisor. But now I'm feeling a little tight. And it's like, okay, you're never going to have a year where you go, I have so much extra profit and so much extra time. I think I'm just going to throw in a production manager, right? You have to work towards that. Now, Murphy's Law also says right after you hire your first production manager, you'll lose a job usually. It's like, oh, because immediately, like, I knew I shouldn't have done this, right? I knew this wasn't the right time. But you just got to look at it and it's saying, I always tell people if you look at, I love watching college football teams when they're rebuilding. It takes 3, 4, 5 years to rebuild. And in the second year, everybody's saying, I think we hired the wrong coach, right? Because the things you have to do in year two almost take the team in the wrong way because you've got to develop the infrastructure. Businesses have got to do that. When I look at a 5 year stretch, and that's why profit percentage targets are tough, because when we say we want you to be at 10 and 12%, it's hard to do that year over year for 5 years without some rebuilding year in there. Now, we don't want you to give it away, but if that's what we're doing this year to get to where we need to, that's a big challenge. So, but I think in that 20-25% range after profit is a good place to be. So, what else?
So Ryan asked if this video is recorded. Yes, it's recorded, and we will publish it on the in the help desk on the webinars tab, as well as at jobtrad.com/webinars. Or best place would be just on our YouTube. If you go, like and subscribe, then you'll get notified every time we put out new great videos.
Good deal. I don't know. So, we have anything else, Eric? Or
See, Victoria asked, said she's new to JobTread. Are there metrics, tracking tools, i.e., from lead to intake through job close for closing percentages for projection purposes? So, I mean, yeah, you can, you can develop out your JobTread dashboards, and you can set up formulas that will help you to be able to track some of that information. I would suggest that you go to check out some of the dashboard training videos. They show you how to do some of those calculations. It's definitely a little bit more advanced, but a lot of that can be done.
yeah,
Oh, that was a nice note from Stacy. Said, Doug, one of the best financial webinars I've listened to. Thanks. That was awesome.
awesome. Well, thank you. That's very nice.
All right. Any other final questions here while you got Doug ready to help answer anything you got?
And Eric, I'm just going to put that QR code up just in case anybody didn't have a chance to download it. If you make sure you get the tool, right?
Yep.
But yeah, this was great.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate you coming on, Doug, and sharing this. I mean, obviously, you clearly are an expert and have done this for many, many years. This certainly wasn't your first rodeo here walking through this type of content, but I think it's really, really interesting, and very insightful for people to be able to see this and just really appreciate you walking them through, kind of your line of thinking and how, you help businesses better learn the numbers.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I'm hopefully everybody that is here, we'll see in a couple of weeks after the holidays in Dallas, right? We're going to be at JobTread Connect. We're excited about that, and have more of these conversations, right? So
Yep.
the timing couldn't be better.
Yeah, definitely got to go and shake Doug's hand, have that opportunity to meet him in person anytime you get it. He's very well known in the remodeling community. So it's certainly a great opportunity, but it's super neat seeing what you've been able to do, breaking into other industries as well, and really helping all these different contractors. Because again, the fundamentals of managing a business are very similar, which regardless which trade you're doing. So it's a great opportunity to get to know Doug even more.
Yeah.
Certainly love to meet everyone as well myself out at JobTread Connect.
Yeah, I know we had booths side by side at the wood flooring industry, the NWFA show,
Yep.
and in that industry, they just haven't seen a lot of this stuff, and man, they were like blown away. It was like they found the Wizard of Oz at the end of the aisle. It was like, what can this stuff do? This is great. So,
Yep.
yeah, so lots of great opportunities out there across lots of industries. So,
Pretty sure we got our booth next to you guys there again this next year too. So really excited about that.
yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be fun.
All right, everyone. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, appreciate you coming on, Doug, sharing all this.
Sure.
If anyone, again, finds this webinar, needs to get this link, he's sharing the slides with you. So definitely grab that. Reach out to Doug, though. I think it's well worth your time, even to schedule a call, with them to learn more about how they can help you take your business to the next level. Again, thank you, Doug. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
Thank you all for joining us today. Have a
All
great
right.
one.
Take care. Yep. Bye bye.